James Bond, the third best thing UK ever made after Metal and Monty Python. They had to make something good after hogging all the spice in the world and using none of it through hundreds of years, right? There is very little I can say about 007 which wasn't already said by better critics. One of the longest lasting movie franchises, icon of the Cold War era that survived to this day. I'm a big fan of the movie franchise and in fact every couple of years my friends and I do a James Bond extravaganza and watch all movies in sequence. I haven't read the books, but by now the movies are an entirely different beast altogether. My favorite James Bond is Pierce Brosnan.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
And my least liked is Craig.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
And no, Lazenby doesn't count. And one of these days I may do a video about how GoldenEye is the best Bond movie ever. And now, whooping 14 years after the last James Bond game, we have First Light, made in the mold of the movie games, for better and worse. Developed and published by EO Interactive in collaboration with Amazon MGM Studios, 007 First Light is a third-person adventure in where we see a new origin story for James Bond, how he entered MI6, the challenges he tackled, and how he gained double O status. EO Interactive is currently mostly known for the Hitman series, which I also played a lot, and it was quite surprising to see them diverge from what's basically a puzzle game about murder into the cinematic flair of British agents. And right out of the gate, it seems they did a good job visually. Being a movie game means that they had to switch the directing and flair into something more cinematic, and I dare say the ending results were way better than many movies I've seen this year. For example, a normal game's cinematography is paused due to how most games are set on different stages, and include stage selections, scoreboards, breaks between cutscenes, etc. First Light tries to make the tone, pace and rhythm to be as brisk and seamless as possible, which works for most of the time. The designers also did their homework with several kinds of color palettes for different places and, like a good movie of the franchise, Bond will visit several exotic locales, both in London and through the globe. Each place has a good lighting, clearly as distinct from one another as it gets. And being the main focus, it's no surprise to say that the cinematography and cutscenes are top notch.
Now, let's see what all the fuss is about. There's Greenway. Hopefully I'm the last thing on his mind.
We have good photography that uses well color and light contrasts, longer shots to let you see who is talking and where, without any wobbly camera. You also have the classic motions such as the swerves when you get into a new area to show off the locale, nice transitions with the title of the chapter showing up. This style is definitely North American, which emphasizes action, explosions and constant motion. Bond rarely, if ever, stays still, which can be a bit annoying, but more about that on the writing aspects. But nonetheless, EO really put an effort to mimic the movies with grand and intense action scenes and an emphasis on stunt work. Character designs are also quite good. While the vast majority of the models are based on their actors, there are some tweaks here and there to make them more unique, such as Bond's scar, which is actually taken from the books. Directing also helps a lot with specific focus on who is talking and when, and characters actually wear different clothes. Of course, there's also a ton of references, from Bond movies to books to past games from EO Interactive, most of all the Hitman series, and so on. Sadly, with the cinematics comes also some nuisances. There is a rather unhealthy dose of product placements, which is inevitably by now, but is still annoying. And while the biggest cutscenes can be skipped, dialogues and minor cutscenes have to be seen over and over again from the start, which as usual is an enormous flaw in games where repetition is part of the charm. Oh, and the bugs. There are lots and lots and lots of bugs, but that's more for the gameplay. Which in First Light actually takes an interesting turn. EO was mostly used to the Hitman series formula where you are let loose in a gigantic scenario having to figure out the best ways of killing your target without rousing suspicion. This DNA is still here, but diluted. In order to give a more cinematic experience, First Light does have the puzzle sections, but also shootouts, melee combat, stealth sections, some platforming, exploration, and driving. Everything is evened out and, well, dumbed down, I mean simplified to reach the maximum audience. This by itself isn't a sin. It's okay for a game to tone things down when shifting audiences or trying something new. And as expected from a first time sudden shift, each section has interesting perks and problems. Let's start with the perks and problems of the overall package, things that will affect everything. First and foremost, this game, pretty much like the Hitman series, has terrible key mapping. One of the most egregious examples is that the dashing to cover is C, so I urge you to remap as much as you can as fast as you can. The saving system is also another huge problem. It doesn't allow manual saves, and it uses not one but two checkpoint systems, one that resets in case Bond dies or fails, and thus is more frequent, and another that saves the game in case you quit or reset your checkpoint. And the game won't tell you which is which, so you may think during a moment that you are safe or clear to quit your game, only to discover that you now have to redo a whole annoying section of the puzzles or go through more firefights. Add to this problem the fact that, as mentioned before, you can't skip dialogues on certain cutscenes, and this irritation escalates to headache levels. And this game is really bugged. I got visual bugs, gameplay bugs, AI bugs, from NPCs running in circles, floating mid-air dead, the game freezing or slowing down when I use certain objects, to really weird bugs such as reloading the game after a failed section actually sent Bond immediately forward, skipping it. Sometimes a gadget will take down a whole group of enemies, sometimes it will just tickle them. Thankfully, I haven't found anything game-breaking, but it's enough to make one seriously reconsider purchasing this game now. On the good aspects, this game is almost seamless in the transitions between sections. In one moment, you are in the middle of a grand party trying to check how to get to the upper floor, and as soon as you step through the door, it flips into a stealth section, only to flip back into exploration after you hop through a window, which is actually harder to program than it looks. These seamless transitions are really good, but also may throw unaware players in disarray since the game won't tell the player that it's time to give a break. Now for the individual parts, in the puzzle sections where Bond has to use his wits to achieve something like going through a locked door or locating an enemy, he will have, most of the time, the help of his gadgets that are charged by either energy or chemicals found in the field, and a la Batman Arkham Asylum, you have the Q lenses, which is just the usual detective vision to highlight interactables, things you can hack, guards, people of interest, items, etc. As mentioned before, if you are seeking the slow burner puzzle that demands a lot of patience in the enormous maps of the Hitman series, you'll end frustrated. In First Light, said sections are still interesting to go through due to offering several possibilities, but they are brief and straightforward in smaller maps. And sometimes the game isn't clear on how to proceed, which leads into frustration. Sometimes you just end up brute forcing the puzzles through the use of gadgets. These do remind me a lot of the Mission Impossible game for the N64. Still, they go nicely and without many hurdles, and give you a good sense of fulfillment when you do something right. At worst, these sections can be unbalanced, like some having lots of ways to recharge your gadgets, others barely having anything available, and one or two spots where you have to sneak into a guarded cubicle and don't know how to properly distract the people there. Speaking of, the stealth in this game is also rather simple. Pretty much like Arkham Asylum, you can keep tabs on your enemies through the detective vision, sneak behind them and put them to sleep. I didn't have many problems with these sections, and the game does offer you many ways on how to deal with your opposition, from feigning surrender to gadgets and environment traps. Another good point is that, if you are discovered, only the guards in the immediate area will be alerted to your presence unless they call for backup, allowing you to contain the situation. And an interesting mechanic is that the game won't allow Bond to pull his weapon and literally open the minds of his foes, and I found it actually an ingenious way of controlling the pace and difficulty. After all, if you let your player pull a silenced piece, he'll just waltz through everything. If things escalate, first Bond will have to rely on his fisticuffs, in a rather wonky combat mechanic also lifted from the Arkham Asylum games. It has the basics such as the parries, the blocks, the grabs, and the dodges, but nothing more elaborated. It's nice and cinematic, with Bond throwing punches and tossing foes over his book stacks, but it's also somewhat clunky. And it gets to a ridiculous level when you notice that all enemies have the same combat animations, meaning that a Somali pirate will throw the same roundhouse kick as a British agent. Fisticuffs are also bizarrely overpowered, since all non-bosses enemies have the same health pool, meaning that a heavily armored mook that can tank 3 shotgun shells to the head can be easily neutralized with some punches. And needless to say, if you start using gadgets in these fights, they turn into cakewalks. The gunplay went for a different formula. To keep the action frantic and Bond moving, he can't hold more than one pistol and one bigger gun like a rifle or shotgun. He can't hold a lot of ammo, covers are nearly always easily destroyed by foes, and as soon as Bond hunkers down behind cover, they will start tossing grenades. But on the other hand, Bond can now throw empty weapons for immediate knockouts and switch guns really fast. There's also a slow-mo to help those who don't have good reaction times, and again several spots for environmental traps. I found those sections quite easy and barely switched guns or used the slow-mo and the environmental traps, because why wait for 3 mooks to finally gather close to the explosive barrels when I can just pop each one individually on the head using a pistol? This was sort of inevitable since this game is now trying a mass appeal, but cranking up the difficulty and better calibrating the encounters wouldn't hurt. Kudos for the cinematic flair though. Of all the package, the exploring sections where you walk around cliffs or talk to people were the weakest, due to simply being padding between the action pieces. My opinion is that a good environmental exploring section, where you jump around climbing around hurdles, is meant to either be a visual puzzle where you explore and try to find your path, and these haven't been well used since the Tomb Raider PS1 era, or test your reflexes, which won't be done here due to mass appeal. So it ends as long swathes of filler and disguises the loading screen. The interactivity in the story is a bit of a middle of the road. Most of the time your choices and the quick time events won't matter, which makes one ask, why were they implemented in the first place? The car riding sections were straightforward, but still thrilling and well tied to the story. In the end, the more I played, the bigger the impression I got that this was a hastily made project, nearly unfinished. Lots of sections felt like filler, empty hallways, minimalistic puzzles like just climbing spots to open a door or literally wait till your friend points out to the right direction. Sometimes the puzzle is literally just walk 2 rooms, flick a switch and then open a door. It's still entertaining, but in an overly light way, not challenging, making it feel as the old adage that if you try to please everyone, you won't please anyone. And it definitely needed more time in the oven. And this impression isn't helped by the writing. I've seen the best and the worst this franchise has to offer. So, is First Light as awful as Quantum of Solace or Moonraker? No. Nice! So this means that the story is good and it's a revival of the franchise, right? Also no. First Light adapted Bond to the modern era better than the Daniel Craig movies, which is a great feat by itself, and actually had really good ideas. But, as usual, it suffers from the same problem of USA modern writing. Everyone is an asshole of nigh unbearable levels and an unhealthy, downright psychotic need to make the main character the messianic underdog. And if you are now wondering how the hell such a formula fits the Bond franchise, congratulations! You have more common sense than the producers of this game. First Light starts nice and simple enough, with Bond saving a bunch of researchers against the odds and then being enrolled into the 00 program, where his status as an outsider of the usual elite makes him an disliked outcast. He befriends the smartest gal of the candidates, gets targeted by a bully... Wait a minute. Secret agent training montage where the main character befriends the smartest gal. Are they copying Kingsman? More or less. Keen players will notice that there is a lot of outsider influences to this game, such as the Uncharted games, Mission Impossible franchise, which feels as if the writers were trying to build a Bond movie with every piece of media except Bond movies, which is as efficient as making a cylinder of fiberglass, calling it a submarine and sending it to check on the Titanic, or throwing a glider through a catapult and calling it the first plane. But back at it, the start isn't that bad. The infection is there, but it was bearable. Cringeworthy, but bearable. We have a long and dynamic cinematic training montage, and the writers actually have good ideas, such as Bond bonding with a big bully by beating him, some camaraderie, and then the plot finally gets into gear. Then things start slowly going downhill, but still fun, at least until the half of the game where things fall faster than Janus' satellite dish at the end of GoldenEye. Which gives credit to my hypothesis that not only the gameplay was rushed, but the writing got seriously redone several times. After all, this game spent 7 years in development and it's now grabbed by Amazon. It starts with several minor but annoying plot holes. For example, how did Bond not blow himself up at the start? How did nobody told Greenway about the flag theft? Just turn your brain off, which would be okay if it was the only problem and not the herald of things to come. And while the pacing is good, the structure is the problem. But let's put a pin on this aspect for now in order, because to wrap this up I have to tackle some topics first. The biggest problem I had with this game was the tone, but what pissed me off was the wasted material. Let's start with the tone. Generally, the tone of a Bond movie is that everyone is experienced in the spy field, so they maintain a professional, casual behavior even in danger. Bond is the main character, but the movie always keeps clear that he is but one of the cogs of the British intelligence, a field agent who is deployed in hairy situations, but he knows that MI6 has his back, and in turn everyone knows they can rely on Bond in mutual trust. That's why when he turned into a rogue agent in License to Kill, it was a huge deal. And part of his appeal is that he extends the same gentlemanly behavior to his foes, and his foes, unless they are deranged or mad, also reciprocate, which why lots of his banters and back and forths are so fun. British quips in media, and by extension the back and forth dialogues, are sarcastic, the so-called dry wit. The goal when insulting you is to make you think and realize you made a fool of yourself, and this is very much present in Bond movies.
It's pining!
It's not pining, it's passed on. This parrot is no more. It has ceased to be.
Friendly British banter is akin to a friendly warm-up in fencing. You poke your friend, but you leave yourself open to retorts on purpose to show that it's all in good faith. It's also meant to test how sharp the other fellow is.
Moneypenny, I'm devastated. What would I ever do without you?
As far as I can remember, James, you've never had me.
North American quips, on the other hand, are meant to humiliate and irritate your opponent as much as you can, therefore giving directly condescending insulting remarks with an annoying voice in order to make the insulter look smarter than the insulted. When indulging in friendly banter, it's still the same, but the tone is alleviated to cheeky, but still annoying, and thus ends up insanely more irritating to the viewer too. And North American protagonists tend to be underdogs, because USA folks have a fetish about rising against unsurmountable odds and being the ones to lead everyone to victory. And by their very nature, underdogs go against the established order and can't or won't receive help from those above them, at best from their peers or those below them. Underdogs are also often not wrong because North Americans are allergic to introspection. That's why everybody in USA loved the Bourne series. Now, take a guess what happens when you switch tones. You now have a cocky and smug Bond who is always right, can't rely on authority, won't accept authority, yet doesn't have the dry wit. You have a better Bones Bond. You just replaced Bond with a straight maverick, with a British accent. And the most ironic thing is that there is a moment in the game where the writing pokes fun at the Manifest Destiny. And, To keep Bond's status as the always right underdog who constantly has to challenge authority, you need to fill the narrative with the biggest bunch of the most annoying, condescending jackasses that won't stop throwing thinly veiled insults who are so stupid that may as well forget how to breathe. And it's as insanely irritating as it sounds like. Instead of making Bond likable, they made everyone else insufferable. To make Bond efficient, they made everyone else stupid. For example, Greenway, Bond's mentor. I hate Greenway so much. Just like I said in my Zootopia review, in order to have chemistry between characters, even when they are antagonistic, they have to bounce upon each other to move the plot forward and pull the best of each one. And here, because the writer set Bond to be the Maverick, Greenway is meant to be Iceman, except that instead of pushing the best of Bond through antagonism, he keeps holding the plot back by either constant petty bickering or by acting like a huge moron and making awful nonsensical decisions that repeatedly nearly get him and Bond killed. He is effectively detrimental to the plot due to his constant screw-ups. He barely teaches Bond anything, and thus to pad the time that would be used for actual good interaction, he keeps chewing Bond up for stuff that was out of his control even when Bond did what he was asked to, and repeat the same boring "I hate you and I want you out of the program." And this keeps being repeated over and over with everyone. Bond discovers something, people act in an incredibly bossy and stupid way to a suicidal level, immediately telling Bond to stand down so he can be the rule-breaking maverick and save the day, over and over. For example, Bond tells Moneypenny that he was nearly assassinated and needs to charge to a specific spot, and Moneypenny replies that he needs to file the proper procedures. What the f***? This is a world of orange cats and Bond is the only one with a brain cell. This North Americanization of the plot affects everyone, including what I call the Fox femme fatale, Isola. Femme fatales are the other side of the coin to secret agents like Bond. They too are crafty, witty, and in complete control of their sexuality in order to seduce targets, make them drop their guards and act. If Bond can seduce a henchwoman to get info, a femme fatale can seduce a guard to get a key card. The Bond franchise has lots of examples of femme fatales, from those who work alongside Bond, like Anya Amazova from The Spy Who Loved Me, or antagonists like Xenia Onatopp and Mayday. And one of the aspects of the femme fatale is that she is, as the name tells you, deadly as hell, and that Bond, while he is a protagonist, isn't necessarily immune to his own tactics. For example, Xenia nearly kills him twice. Isola is presented as a femme fatale, showing up equally disguised like Bond, and next time they meet she is in a really provocative dress, but she acts in a constant arrogant and condescending way to everyone, especially Bond, every single second. This would be the death of a femme fatale because men, especially powerful men, immediately feel threatened or hostile when a woman pushes back. If she's not inviting, if she doesn't pretend to be vulnerable, they won't drop their guards. If Xena acted like an asshole to the Canadian officer in GoldenEye, he would just tell her to f*** off and she wouldn't lure him to a bed and proceed to kill him in a way that 80% of men want to go, me included. Thus, her mission would end up in failure. And since Isola is an incompetent femme fatale, the writing has to compensate by telling, not showing her feats. She teleports to whenever she needs to be, there are rows of corpses of minions, but we don't see her throwing a single punch and so on. Now, putting everything in a blender and return to the point where I put a pin, what I hated most about the writing is how really close it got to being great, but always pulled back at the last second, to rely on the tiresome and annoying North American cliches and cheap drama. The main story idea is actually really good. There is a moment of genuine British banter between Bond and M's secretary, but the dialogue soon return to being irritating. Isola actually pulls the femme fatale role once, pretending to be vulnerable to lure Bond into trusting her, but by then there is no chemistry between them, and she immediately returns to being condescending. The main villain, who I won't spoil, has a really good intro pretending to be a smarmy idiot and actually manages to catch Bond completely unaware, and then immediately reveal that he is yet another boring rich psychopath villain. There are several interesting characters and concepts presented, and then immediately pushed aside and promptly forgotten about. If this just had been a bland and boring narrative, I would just brush it off, but it showed potential, real potential. My impression is that either they hired really bad writers, that Amazon meddled with sudden shifts in the story that left gaping holes, or both, because after the middle there's a lot of filler, like whole walking sections that could have been just a simple cutscene, and reliance on characters behaving in stupid ways alongside gaping plot holes, which leads to jumping the shark so hard it makes Moonraker, okay, not Moonraker, not that far, but it jumps the shark badly. It digs for stupid to a level it would put the dwarves of Moria to shame. It would dig past the Balrog, past the unreachable realms where Morgoth lies forgotten, into another franchise altogether. I'm talking about levels of stupid that dedicate whole scenes to justify Bond losing his guns to Technobabble only to immediately backtrack and completely ignore the Technobabble. Or people starting to just teleport left and right across the globe, laws of physics and logic being denied to just push the flimsy plot forward. But to make things even worse, there is not enough plot to go on, so the narrative just stumbles forth like a decapitated cockroach running on the last droplets of its blood. I'm serious. This game has 3 endings and the final boss has 3 stages. Just like Bond, this game doesn't know when to quit, except that Bond can be charming and has a clear goal. And at any writing problem whatsoever, any, be it lack of pacing or the plot writing itself into a corner, the writing desperately jumps into a bombastic stupid drama like a lifeboat, except that in this case is a cartoon anvil. This game manages to be at the same time incredibly short, with just 15 hours of content, and feel immensely stretched out. By the end, I felt sad. This game heralded that this was the start of 007, but Bond doesn't learn anything new, besides the training montage. Nobody teaches him anything. He's just a perfect fit for a vague scenario of stuck-up assholes. And after the short campaign, you're expected to just do and redo the virtual missions, which, no thanks. And now Amazon got the reins of this franchise, and it will only get worse. But after all this misery, I am actually glad to say that the music is really good. David Arnold already worked with the Bond franchise, so he is really at home in making really good music that fits what's happening like a glove. You have the exotic low tunes whenever Bond gets somewhere new, the more intense pieces, and of course when it's time to blow everything up, the game blasts the main Bond theme, or interestingly, the main theme of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. The main theme, sung by Lana Del Rey, is nice. It's no Skyfall, but it's nice, and the presentation is also good. Voice and acting wise, I can't properly judge Patrick Gibson as Bond because there's barely anything of Bond left. Outside of it, I think that he did a good job. He played dramatic scenes well, was charming, but he lacks raw charisma and scene presence. And the writing doesn't help either. I say that he's not the best nor the worst. And I heard that a lot of people complaining about the inclusivity in First Light. And it's true. There is a lot of inclusivity in this game. In fact, the devs wanted to be so inclusive that they hired an inanimate piece of wood to be M. I say that their hearts were in the right place, but the execution is terrible. After all, just because she is an authority figure doesn't mean that she needs to lack facial expressions, and contained acting isn't no acting at all. The rest of the cast, even if I hated their characters, were nice and did their jobs well. In the end, yeah, this is sadly an undercooked game in several aspects. It can be pleasant and not overly challenging, thus fitting for a rainy afternoon where you just wanna chill playing a cinematic game. But even then, at best, I suggest you to wait 1 year to let the studio iron out all the problems in the mechanics and wait for a sale, because it's definitely not worth full price and Amazon will shove as much as cheap DLCs as they can get. So if you really wanna play this, wait for one of those discount bundles. It showed the potential for a good story, but sadly just ends with kernels buried within shallow tropes. I don't wanna be one of those pessimistic, overly dramatic YouTubers going, "They ruined James Bond! James Bond is dead!" But the quality of the writing doesn't bode well to the franchise as a whole. It seems to understand what makes Bond tick, but it's unable to pull it off. If because of the writers or the producers, I don't know. Now for the spoilers. So the main plot is that the MI6 adopted Thea, an AI supercomputer made by Sir Nicholas Webb, and the intelligence gathering and analytical capabilities of this computer not only made the original 00 program obsolete, it also denounced traitors in its midst. The current M seeks to revive the 00 program, and after Bond gets into it, his first mission is to find out the rogue agent 009. This mission ends in disaster with one of Bond's friends dying and the other being crippled and thus disappearing from the game, which is a shame because she was a really interesting character that could have been changed into a support role. Bond is filled with righteous anger, thinking that 009 was responsible for the attack and chases after him alongside Greenwood. Sadly, they find 009 already dead, which also removes a potentially interesting character from the plot. Now, Greenwood is such an awful agent, I genuinely believed he was going to betray Bond. Really. His ideas are moronic and constantly endanger Bond. Any piece of evidence that he gets, he ends up destroying. He forgets to take backups, he doesn't photograph or film evidence, he doesn't stop to think a single second on anything besides his objective. Like a damn robot who lives and breathes through asshole remarks towards anything living and breathing next to him. So this is the first case where I was fooled by dumb writing.
It's so dumb.
It's so dumb, it's brilliant.
No! It's just dumb!
It gets so dumb that when Bond reveals the whole thing, Greenwood has a drama fit akin to a Disney movie and quits, because this is a North American plot and friends need to break up in the middle. Now, the actual plot reveal is that the supercomputer is fallible and constantly fucks up, which forces Webb to send his son to falsify proof. This is a really good idea in several levels, because there is a genuine concern about AI taking over our lives and fucking up, especially because incompetent governments keep giving it access to sensitive data. It shows another facet of how unchecked AI can ruin several lives, and justifies Damien, Webb's son, being an actual threat to Bond. Webb had no one he could trust, so he had to train Damien to be what's basically an counter-spy to send him to dangerous areas. So I noticed that there was something weird when Bond had to invade Webb's main tower. Generally, this sort of move is meant for the end of the story, not the middle. This was a really boring level because there was barely anything to do, mostly it was just navigating hallways and exposition. But still, Bond discovers the evidence, Greenwood fucks it up again by not saving anything nor recording anything, and they are branded rogue agents. From here, Bond goes to Vietnam, gets a rather convenient proof against Webb, Greenwood dies in a rather well-filmed moment, even if I couldn't care one bit about his character, and Bond kills Damien. End of story! Except that the game doesn't end there. For some reason, M doesn't arrest Webb on the spot. Webb escapes and actually leaks secret intel to the world, threatening to leak more if he isn't pardoned. And M obeys to his demands instead of sending a kill team like she should have done a long time ago. And she, acting like a colossal moron, is meant to push Bond into quitting MI6 again and be a rogue agent again, because he figured out that Webb is tapping into MI6 intel and no one believes him. He goes to the Arctic, goes through several levels and finally confronts Webb, who has tied his own heartbeat to his supercomputer. If he dies, the intel will be released. Bond could just, shoot Webb's gun away and blast his kneecaps, especially since this is an actual gameplay mechanic, and even says that he doesn't need to kill Webb, but by now the plot is running on stupid, so he just throws his gun away like an idiot, which prompts Isola to teleport, steal the supercomputer, kill Webb and run away. Bond has the chance to kill her and retrieve the supercomputer, but again, because this plot is now running on stupid, he doesn't. It's really sad because if the writing had balls, he would pull a Pierce Brosnan in The World Is Not Enough and shoot Isola. But he shoots the computer, captures Isola, and it's the end of the game. Except that it's not the end of the game again. Turns out, Damien, Webb's son, survived being crushed by steel pipes and Bond's one-liner, pulled an army out of his ass, and attacked MI6 in order to get Thea. And this is where the writing gets the closest to the being British, because Bond has to fight a maniac with delusions of grandeur, clad in power armor that resembles a Greek statue, and if that's not the most Warhammer 4K shit, I don't know what it is. This is also where the writing gets to its stupidest. For example, when Bond has to get into Thea's chamber, M tells him that he can't get in with a weapon due to electromagnetic forces or whatever, but the door opens to reveal a guy in a power armor. Anyway, he kills Damien, Isola saves him, steals the computer, Bond gets his 00 status, and ends the story, not revealing what happened to several side characters, like for example, if Moneypenny survived being knifed. The end. So yeah, I was absolutely fed up with this story, and it definitely jumped the shark. It's sad, it had a lot of potential that better writers could easily pull off. But it is what it is. That's all for today, thank you very much, and see you all next time. Remember to like and subscribe.